Well, good morning. I'm so happy to see so many of you here because this is such a topic that's close to our hearts, for sure, in Santa Cruz. Our speaker today has been working in the field of affordable housing for 33 years, starting when she and her young son were displaced by redevelopment in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That was the beginning of a long journey to Santa Cruz. She has been with our county for the past 15 years, working with the housing section of the planning department for the past 12, and managing its housing section for the past 5 years, since the elimination of redevelopment funding. She currently heads the county's housing section, which includes the affordable home ownership portfolio, lending and preservation programs, and the construction of affordable rental housing, and coordination of funding for the homeless program. All this since she has only 4 staff, so she's a very busy person. I first became aware of one of the programs our speaker is going to talk about today, and that is Measure J. When I first came to Santa Cruz, after a few months, I happened to run across a townhome that had been built in 23 units. It's a complex called Casa La Familia. Now, some of you probably know where that is on 7th Avenue in Live Oak. It's for low and moderate income seniors to buy. So it's a lovely 33-year-old complex, but it had developed some serious problems in recent years that the Homeowners Association simply could not handle alone. I happened to be on the board, so I was very close to what some of the problems were. One issue was that there are a high number of rentals with the attendant problems. Most rentals were due to being inherited by non-residents who then would place them for rent. However, it was our speaker today who found a solution to that and is helping save our little portion of affordable housing in Santa Cruz for seniors, for which we are deeply grateful. In fact, there are a number of my neighbors here today who are here to also support her. But now, let's hear it for our speaker today, Julie Conway.
Thank you, Eve. That was very kind. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for your interest in this topic. I think it's fair to say that the lack of affordable housing in our community affects us in so many ways, and it affects everybody, whether we own a home or secure ourselves. So it's important across the board. So thank you for your interest, and I know that some of the, many of you here have taken an active role in trying to address this problem. So I was asked to organize my thoughts around 3 general areas. One of them is to speak about the impact of the affordable housing shortage in our county and the efforts that the county is taking in order to try to address them. Some changes to the county's affordable housing guidelines, which gives me a chance to talk about the Measure J program a little bit. And then how is the county coping with the loss of the redevelopment agency? And we have a lot of efforts going on in that way too. So about 35 minutes. A lot of you know you get me talking in one direction, and good luck getting me to stop. So hopefully I've got a general enough area that I'll get most of your questions addressed. So first of all, the impacts of the affordable housing shortage in our county. And I want to be clear that we're talking about 2 different things, and I'm talking about all of it. One of them is affordable housing that is designated and deed restricted to be affordable. And those are projects such as the one next door, Aptos Blue Apartments. That is a rental project that the county was deeply involved in, and one of the heroes of that project, Diana O'Farrell, is here from Mid-Penn Housing. That is a project that's going to be affordable for our workforce for many, many years. The Measure J units are deed restricted. Those are also going to remain affordable every time the units get bought and sold. Housing affordability is a much bigger question, and it's, as this crisis has built up, it's become more and more clear that just the fact that our rules for building housing that have been in place for many years create a housing product that is by its nature unaffordable. And I think that's an important issue to address. But partly because, let's look at what happens to a community if there's not enough affordable housing. This is talked about a lot lately, but I don't think we can say it enough. When we don't have affordable housing, families end up being overcrowded. We end up with a very high degree of housing instability. Seniors can't move out of their homes. One of the efforts that's been underway, people are talking with me about lately, is how many empty bedrooms are there in this county? If we count all the empty bedrooms and all the people that need housing, and we could match them up, would that solve the problem? You know, and I mean, our market constrains movement, and that is bad, because as people move through their lives, young people need to move away from home. They need to move eventually into bigger homes. Seniors don't necessarily need to have 6,000 square foot yards to look after or bigger. And high affordability means that we don't have a lot of movement. One of the things that we focus on a lot is that large portions of our workforce drive long distances in order to get to work. And that's a problem, of course, because we have clogged freeways, right? That's bad. But it also means that these long commutes are taking people who work in our community or different parts of our community out of the places they live and where presumably their children go to school, or maybe their children aren't going to school next door to with the kids in their neighborhood. So then we have things like, because of those long commutes, people aren't in the PTA. Do they still call it that? I'm not sure they do. I'm showing my age. Or Little League, or any of the kind of community groups that, you know, we think in an idealized way that what makes our community rich. You know, the after-school programs and just all of the activities. And just not to mention the anxiety of having your kids many, many miles away from where you're working. And you know, a sick kid and all of those things. It makes our community poorer if the people who work in our community can't live in our community. And then the last thing I want to touch on is something that I see all the time: overpaying for housing. It's bad for everybody. It's bad if you make a decent living, and a lot of people who make a decent living are overpaying for housing. But if you are lower income and you're overpaying for housing, you are now, by definition, unstable, because it just doesn't take much to dislodge you from that housing. You know, people talk about the high rate of homelessness in our community, and I think it's pretty well established and accepted by now that the vast majority of people who are homeless in our community come from our community. There's a lot of different factors that play into it, but absolutely, without a doubt, the high cost of housing is a big part of that. That's just a quick skip over some of the issues around housing, but I want to come back to some of the things that the county is doing about it. So this is my chance to talk about, we do still have a housing section. We do still have very busy staff. We have grant programs, we have down payment assistance, we have mobile home change-out programs. We do every single Measure J home that buys or sells, we're involved in, and we work. It doesn't seem that controversial. We are very heavily involved in protecting our affordable housing stock. We don't have nearly enough. And because of that, we use I think we've been pretty creative with our remaining housing resources to make sure that, for instance, Casa La Familia, that the Measure J units in our portfolio, we've got about 500 Measure J units in the county. We have another 300 or 400 that are deed restricted through first-time homebuyer programs that from the former redevelopment agency. And we work very hard to not lose those units. We lost a few right after redevelopment went away because we didn't have access to any money. But we don't let that happen anymore. The other thing that people think that, oh, you still have a housing section, what are you doing? You don't have anything left. Well, our county committed all of its redevelopment housing dollars into enforceable contracts in 1 week in June of 2011. We had a lot of constraints on how we could do that. They had to be projects that had been through the environmental review process. But as a result of that, our housing production actually more than doubled in the last 5 years of what it had been in the previous 15 years. So we've been building units really fast, thanks to MidPen, and who's a really terrific partner. But so we're very busy doing that. We also have redevelopment reuse funds. So loans that have been out in the past are coming back. And Supervisor Friend doesn't know this yet, but we're actually going to be spending some of that money soon, or hoping to commit money to new projects. And it is worth noting that 2 projects are coming up. One is starting development this month, which is St. Stephen's Senior Apartments, 40 units of affordable senior housing across from the Harbor High football field. That's a project that I have to shine a light on for a minute because it really came out of a partnership spawned by activism. And St. Stephen's Lutheran Church was active in COPA, which is an affordable housing advocacy organization. Well, they're broader than that, but affordable housing is one of their things. And those members took a look at the land behind their church that was vacant. And they spent a long time deliberating very carefully, but looking at would that be an appropriate site for an affordable housing project. Someone asked me yesterday when we first talked about it, I couldn't remember for sure, but I know that we committed money in 2010, which is the first of the pre-development money. So even before we saw redevelopment demise coming, we committed funds to that project, and it broke ground this month. But it's going to be a beautiful project and serve a really important need. The second one is Pippin Apartments. Is just outside, well, no, it isn't actually, a really unusual project that is half in the city of Watsonville and half in the county of Santa Cruz and on Atkinson Lane in South County. 46 units, again, a really innovative project. One of the things I love about both of these projects is Thank you. Sorry about that. Of both of these projects, and I can talk about projects for a long time, so I'm going to keep this short. But they both are a mix of incomes, and they do something that we know is a best practice. There are a few units in both of the projects for people with special needs. So in other words, the projects are overall affordable to lower income households, which, by the way, in our county is not that low. You don't have to really be very low income to qualify for affordable housing in this county. But a few of the units in both projects are set aside for people with disabilities, and the developer has partnerships with, in the case of Pippin, with Housing Choices Coalition, providing housing for people, families who have a member with developmental disabilities, and in the case of St. Stephen's, for formerly homeless veterans and frail elderly. And one of the very special best practices that I want you all to know about, and this is why I think it's so important to develop our affordable rental housing with partners who have the capacity to not just partner with outside agencies who provide services, but to coordinate them right within the property and to finance the properties in such a way that they can support them. And in this way, this is the model that can really make room for everybody. So those are those two projects that are underway. I was just going to start talking about the homeless activities that we coordinate, but I realized, you know what, we would veer off there, so let's just leave it at that we also do that, okay? So I mentioned earlier, you know, what is the county doing to address the housing affordability crisis? So yeah, my section is busy. We write grants, we do all this stuff. But the bigger issue is that we have land use patterns in this community that are really of an era in which the growing sector of our community would be young families who need to have single-family homes. We know now that the fastest growing single sector are one-person households. And we know that if we want to address the housing need of our community, we need to be able to build housing with small units in it. You know, one bedroom, even studio apartments, which are therefore going to be affordable. And there's been an effort underway, the county's been working on, has a couple things underway. One of them is, some of you I know participated in the Sustainable Santa Cruz County Plan. And this was a study that took a look at where do people live and work, what is the, you know, and where might it be appropriate to build housing of another type. We know that mixed-use development along transportation corridors are a way to make housing more affordable. So if we can build small units, if we can make it pencil for it to get built, because the where that we can relieve the pressure on our community. So that is a process that's underway right now. The city of Santa Cruz is actually doing it as well with their corridor planning. The idea behind it is to protect our single-family neighborhoods that we all love so much, and hopefully everybody gets to live in, you know, for part of the time at least of their lives. I know I feel like that. And we can do that by directing the units for the students, singles, seniors, into areas where they can easily get to places where, you know, get by without a car to the extent possible. It's part of our transportation problem, it's part of our housing problem, and we know that it can work. So there is underway right now a process of, you know, the board has taken action on a number of pieces of that, and the planning department is working to, you know, to update the code in ways that's going to hopefully make it possible to reasonably build some smaller units that will be more affordable, rather than doing what right now the only thing that we really allow to be built are single-family homes, which because builders can't build very many of them, they are going to make them as expensive as possible. So, I mean, that's another policy direction that is well underway. Sorry about that. So the loss of redevelopment. At the time in 2011, when redevelopment was eliminated, the county lost $8 million a year that was targeted for use as affordable housing, and only as affordable housing. That is a devastating loss. What we were doing with that money were some very innovative programs, some of which we've been able to continue through grants, but it's not coming back. We know it's not coming back. We do have, as I mentioned earlier, we have some reuse money. We will be able to build at least one more, invest in at least one more project. But that local source of dollars that we got through redevelopment allowed us to bring the investment that it takes into the community to build housing like Aptos Blue, whose pro forma I don't have in my head right now, but let me talk about Shapiro Knolls. Do you all know that project? It's an 88 unit in South County, beautiful project. And I just want to talk about how important local dollars are. That project cost something in the neighborhood of $32 million to build. And a lot of money. The county, former redevelopment agency, then the county had a tremendous amount of money in there, $10 million, a lot of money. And there was some other, grant money and a little, smaller amounts of money. But the bulk of that money, over half of it, I believe the number is $16 million. $16 million came from low-income housing tax credits. Maybe you've heard about that. That is what the federal government, it's a federal housing program, basically, through the tax code. Too complicated to talk about here. But it's a limited resource. It's tremendously complicated. And a project, over half of the capital comes from private investors. It's a good idea. There's just not nearly enough of it. And it is so extremely competitive. You can't even apply for that money until your project is perfect. It meets every possible environmental review and county and, planning and financing, and there's, everything about it is ready to put a shovel in the ground and build it. And then what you have to meet what's called a tiebreaker, which means you have to have local dollars in it. So even these projects that have, like I said, that project, Shapiro Knolls, $10 million, it applied for tax credits 5 times before it finally got it. And that's not unusual. Aptos Blue that was kind of a slam dunk. Yeah. It's an unusual project. St. Stephen's, 4 times, and a couple of different funding scenarios. So every time you do this, these are complicated, labor intensive, and we end up with beautiful projects. This is why we're so committed to working with developers who are going to maintain their affordability after the rules go away. Your mission-driven housing is really important for that reason as well. Without that local tiebreaker, so these are the projects that had a pile of local money in them. And without it, there's projects lined up. We don't know how much local money is going to be needed in order to leverage the investors required to build housing. So it's one of the things that we worry about the most, and especially in terms of being able to get new projects going. So that sounded really depressing. What have we done about it? We have, one of the things that we did is we updated last year the affordable housing program known as Measure J, and which has always been taken an approach of building units on site, and that's still an option. But what it did is we did a nexus study, and we took a look and recognized that every job that's created, every home that's built in Santa Cruz County creates a need for housing. So therefore, all development needs to help meet this need. The purpose of that was to generate a local source of dollars so that we would be able to compete for programs like low-income housing tax credits. I should mention also that there was, for 2 years, we're trying out, what if we give developers of projects of 5 or more units the option to either provide units on site or to pay a fee. So right now we're collecting data on that, taking a look and seeing what the impact is. We'll be returning to the board in 2017 to talk about whether that's a long-term policy that we'll stick with. I know a lot of you are very familiar with that decision. So yeah, between the impact fees, which we're hoping is going to help create a local source, also trying to be very creative with new funding programs coming online, like the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities money, the cap and trade money, which is a fascinating state program. It's a little tough for our community, But the idea is that, yes, you need affordable housing, community must build affordable housing, but it's important to do it along with transportation improvements. And so this is going to force communities to include things in new ways and really push the envelope that way. So I think that's all that I need to say, and I think there might be some questions.
Yes. I know that some communities like this one have a problem attracting policemen and firemen and people like that because they can't find housing. And I do know that in places like Bar Harbor, Maine, that's very expensive, has that problem, and they've actually built, I wouldn't call it low-income housing, but housing that's affordable for those workers. Have we ever thought of doing that here?
We have thought of it, and we've done a couple of different forays over into that area. It is complicated. We work very hard. Ellen Peary, when she was in office, really was encouraging us. You all know Canterbury Park townhomes over across the way. We worked very hard to, in fact, we did have a preference for people involved in education, which is another group of people that, as I mentioned earlier, we want our teachers living in our communities. We want our public safety officers. I think we want everyone to work here living in our community. So we did go through the process. It's not as easy as you might think to have a preference over there. We did manage to get some people who are involved in education, which felt like a big success. Also in an earlier time, when we had redevelopment funds, we had a special loan program, and it was to try to meet that exact thing. We don't have those funds available now. There are tools that we're looking at all the time, and one of them would be if, say, a school district had some land, and so fair housing rules always apply if you use public money. But if you use a resource that you can connect employment and housing, which is also tricky business, you can do that. And one of them is through the donation of land, or a land contribution in one way or another. And I hope that we can do that. It would probably not include the county financial resources, although it certainly could include planning resources.
Could you talk a little bit about the updating of the code with respect to sustainability? What things need to be updated?
Sure. And some of it gets kind of down in the weeds, so, I won't go too far down. For one thing, I'm not a planner. I always like to start out saying I'm not a planner and I'm not a lawyer, so therefore there's all kinds of things that I don't have to talk about in such detail. But one of the big issues that we have is that our code prohibits financing. Wait, let me go back. First of all, we're accepting as one of the tools that at certain intersections, certain places along Portola Drive, Socal, that there are some places that would benefit from mixed use. So housing above commercial. And this is, it's a very popular model. We know that it's something that makes for livable communities. But our current code, all it is limited to 1 floor of commercial and 1 floor of residential. And I've been looking at potential projects for years on that model, and the problem is that's not how banks want to lend, and it's not an efficient use of land. So if you're going to build a project like that, what ends up making sense is to make those units, if you have 1 floor of residential, make them as expensive as possible. So make them big, make them fancy. When we know what we need is, smaller, 500, 600, 700 square foot apartments. And in that case, we need at least 2 floors in order to make it make sense. And the other thing is that if we can have more height and if we can have more density, we can get more attractive projects. Because if we're limited, then what we get is square boxes. We don't get the the more attractive buildings. I mean, think the Walnut Commons in downtown Santa Cruz. It's one that, it's a very dense project. I mean, I don't see a project that dense coming into the county. I might not have brought it up, but it's a very attractive building with a lot of units in a small area. Coming up with some tools that in certain areas allow for the construction of that kind of building, would allow us to get there. So that's one of the things that's underway through the total modernization. I should brought my cheat sheet to answer it all. But yes, sir.
I'm on the county arts commission, and we're trying to have more public art included in public projects. Are you making any inroads in that?
Well, I think we are, actually. I mean, on the projects that we've been able to fund, I could point you to this one. For one thing, please make your way, if you haven't already, walk down the hill and walk through Aptos Blue, the historic Castro House at the back of the property. You're welcome to go back there, right, Diana? Just walk on back. It's a beautiful property, and the developer very carefully preserved and maintained that building. There's a lot of public art there. Another example is at Shapiro Knolls. There's a beautiful series of installations that honor our former housing chief, Eric Shapiro, who was a notable bicyclist. So there's these beautiful bicycle sculptures of all different kinds of bikes and that kind of thing. And I agree, public art is an important part of what enriches our community.
Thank you.
Question is, what does the planning group consider really affordable housing? It used to be that when people were paying rent, there was a certain percentage of your income that was considered affordable or reasonable. What is now affordable?
That's a good question. So the question is, what does affordable housing mean and what's the standard? And it is a very well-defined standard. It's a standard that goes back to the New Deal, actually. In the 1930s, affordable housing was defined as 25% of income. But in, I think it was 1963, that was redefined by the federal government, and it's now 30% of income. So many of the programs that I referred to, low-income housing tax credits, housing choice voucher programs, any federal funding, any state funding, and any local funding. If you're using government money, the basic standard is 30% of a household, gross household income should go to housing costs. And if you're talking about rental units, that usually includes utilities. In the lending market, however, in home ownership, that's changed. And for a little while there, it was getting a little wild and crazy and going up to 40%. Banks were making loans on 45%, or even what those famous no-paper loans. Banks weren't being very fussy, and we know what happened. That didn't work out so well. But for the most part, most affordable ownership programs still assume around 35% of income for housing costs, and that would be if you're paying a mortgage, HOA, taxes and insurance.
Could I ask one more question? You talked about how complicated it is with this business of tax credits.
Yes.
What makes it so complicated? Why does it have to be so complicated?
Good question. So the quick answer would be, as Eve mentioned, I've been going around blocks in this area for a long time, and I can remember under the Reagan administration when the Department of Housing and Urban Development, before you were born, actually was in the housing production field. There were some issues with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. There was a big change to look for another way for the federal government to participate in the field of housing. Acknowledging, of course, that the biggest single federal field is the mortgage interest tax deduction. But what they did is they said, well, what if we change the tax code and we set up a way to incent people to invest in affordable housing. And so in other words, it's a way to bring private dollars into these projects. So it's complicated because it is the tax code. It's complicated because it's using private dollars for a public purpose, and it's very heavily regulated, and very heavily defined. When it first came out, the nonprofit developer I worked for at the time, we called it an entitlement program for middle-class professionals because it takes so many accountants and lawyers and financing consultants, and it's a complicated program. I don't know how to make it simpler, but if I did, I'd probably work somewhere else.
Over here,
Sorry.
over here, over here.
Oh, thank
And
you.
here.
So sorry, I wasn't doing a very good job of watching hands. Yes.
The first time, the county's first time home buyer program,
Mhm.
does that still exist?
It does. We definitely have all kinds of homes that were purchased with county assistance. And what happens as those loans are repaid, the money goes into our RDA reuse fund, and we continue restrictions through a subsidy underwriting program. So yes, it still exists. We cannot use the money we have, redevelopment money we have, on new units. We do still have a first-time homebuyer program, and what we use is grant funds for it. And we've been pretty successful in bringing in state grant funds. So we now have 2 active programs. One of them, it's one program, but one of them is funded through home funds, which are federal dollars, and the other one is through Cal Home, and those are state dollars. So it isn't as much money, but we still have an active program, and we very much encourage interest in it.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you to consider doing 2 things. First off, you have my sympathy here. With the current constraints, you're like a sailor trying to run a sailboat with both arms tied behind your back, just by leaning. One thing I'd like to ask you to consider is trying to look at the possibility of legalizing what Mr. Posner did. I think a detached bedroom without a bathroom in the kitchen should be legal. It's been legal for 37 years in Sweden. Which brings me to my second point. I'd like you to consider an exploratory trip to Sweden and talk to the housing minister and take your secretary with you. Get out of the forest for a little while, go see what somebody else is doing. I lived there for 10 years, and they are so much smarter and more innovative and effective in providing housing for everybody than we could possibly imagine without changing a lot of the clothes of the rest. So in order to do that, 1, you need to see it on the ground. 2, you need to have your secretary write it down. And 3, you need to come back and say, we can do this. We can do this even better than the Swedes did.
I am all in favor of a trip to Sweden. Put me down for that. No, and it's housing models, and I always appreciate your input on innovative housing models. And I mean, I do think it's important, and we need to be looking at solving the problem in different ways than we've been using, and you make a really good point. And I'll keep you up to date on that trip to Sweden. Yes.
Yeah, I work with CASA, which, as you know, has nothing to do with houses, but worked with foster kids. And we're working with a population of former foster youth who are 18 to 21. The state's ready to help pay their rent and supervise them, but finding those extra bedrooms or studio apartments proves almost to be impossible. And I wonder if there's any program or services that you can think of that might assist with that effort.
As you know, this issue is near and dear to my heart. I was a CASA for many years, and I never took on a second CASA kid because I never really got done with the one I'm working with, who's now a big part of my life and is homeless. It is a huge problem. So I don't want to just be depressing. There's a couple of efforts going on, and one of them is, I said I wasn't going to talk about homelessness, and I'm not, but I'm going to make reference to the all-in plan. which was an 18-month process. Over 200 people participated to come up with strategic priorities to address homelessness in our community. One of those strategic priorities has formed around trying to get more landlords to take tenant-based subsidy. It's one of the big issues we have, not just for foster youth, but for just a wide array of people who have subsidy, which was, the federal government's better idea was, instead of building projects, we're going to give it to individuals and go find it in the market, and therefore disperse it throughout the communities, which is a great theory if you have housing that can be used. But the All-In Plan has formed a great working group called the All-In Landlord Partnership. That is, we're getting terrific help. Plantronics is helping us with a marketing plan. We're going to be rolling that out. The county has provided a little bit of funding to provide some security for landlords experimenting with renting to people they haven't in the past. And I feel really optimistic about that. We only have just the number of units we have in the community, so it's not enough. We need to do a lot more. But I think it's a way to get everybody involved in solving the problem. Maybe some of you saw Michelle Obama's really terrific video on appealing to landlords to rent to veterans. It's a beautiful piece of work, and it really does acknowledge that the solution to this problem, it's political. We're going to have a lot of push me, pull you conversations about how we resolve this. But ultimately, this is our community, and it's going to take all of us to solve it. And so I feel like that's one of the things that has some hope with it. I also know that the Association of Faith Communities has some very innovative ideas where they're trying to work with people who have extra bedrooms or maybe a place that could be rented to a veteran, former foster youth, that kind of thing, and have supportive services attached.
I would just like to point out that in Sweden and Norway and places like that, people pay a lot in taxes, and that allows them to build housing, and housing is a lot cheaper. So, if you want to be highly taxed, we would have a lot of money to do it.
I still think I should go to Sweden and check it out.
I have a friend who lives there.
It's a very good point, Nancy.
Yes, is there anything happening around the bill that Alejo passed last year? I think it was 81, 2. And is there any chance that that money can be used, or money can be gotten from that for this housing?
So it is one of the attempts to create a redevelopment-like pot of money in which property tax income is frozen at a certain defined area, freeze income, and then the increase in property taxes, that money can be used for local projects. I think that there will be ways to leverage some of that. There's some limitations around it that I'm really still getting up to speed on. You need to identify areas to have a high enough low-income population, but you can aggregate. So I think we're going to be able to find a way to use it. It looks like it's going to be most useful in the city of Watsonville, but we won't give up easily.
And is there a way we can help make that happen? Organized groups around the 4,000?
Yes, definitely. And I think there's some other legislation that's going to be moving on, and I know that Affordable Housing Now is working on both the local and state level. And I think there's a couple pieces of legislation that you can be helpful on. One of them is the Palmer fix, where we're trying to allow for to require inclusionary units in rental projects. That's going to be an important piece of legislation. And so I think there's going to be a number of things like that going on.
3 things, but they'll all be layups. So first, in terms of inclusionary zoning, how do you define the income threshold for current inclusionary zoning and county regulations? So what is the affordability metric that you're using? And the second would be, has there been any outreach to existing Section 8 landlords who are currently under the housing program to kind of survey them about their experience in Section 8? You know, there's a lot of misconceptions about renting in Section 8, a lot of, held beliefs that perhaps aren't true, and I think it would be interesting to actually survey those who are currently renting to Section 8 tenants to kind of get a grip of what is it really, is it hard, is there any differences, do you really enjoy renting to Section 8? And then finally, could you provide the overview of the density bonus regulations in the county code?
Sure. I need to repeat some of those as we go along. So first of all, if you're asking about who qualifies to purchase a Measure J home, I think that's what you were asking.
No, for inclusionary units, what is the threshold for income to qualify for? Yeah.
In order to purchase a unit, you have to be at or below 120% of area median income in order to purchase a Measure J home. Most of our Measure J buyers are well below that. We've done surveys over the years, and they tend to, many of them are below 80%, which counts as low income. So that's that one. The next one is, I mentioned the All-In Landlord Partnership that it has formed. It's a really great group, and you'll appreciate this. I have, as you can tell from my background, I know nothing about marketing. But there are people who do. So we've got a marketing plan, and it has a magic quadrant of landlords who use Section 8 and love it, and we have people who build their business plan on renting to people who have our voucher holders. Some that are sort of so-so, have experience, and then there's the ones that absolutely no way, never. There's a video that's been made. Like I said, we've got a lot of cool partnerships in here. There's some UCSC students, and you should be able to see this video before too long. I shouldn't give you a timeline because that's not my piece of it, but in the upcoming months, you'll be seeing some, people, talking about, landlords talking about why it's great, tenants talking about how much it's meant to them, and really trying to bust some of the myths that are going on. And what's the third one?
Density bonus.
Oh, density bonus. The density bonus is a state law that we have baked into local code. We've done some updating on it. We did that with the affordable housing update that we finished a year ago that I think really made it a lot better. And what that says is that if you're building units and you want to, and you're willing to deed restrict some as being affordable, and by deed restriction, that means that you don't just tell us you're going to do it. It says that right there in your deed, and we can enforce it. Then you're allowed to build up to 35% more units, depending on a whole bunch of factors like how much affordability, how deeply affordable they are, and that kind of thing. And so you get some special concessions for some special populations. Along with that, you get some concessions from the development standards that allow you, that make it easier to build a unit. It still has to go through the whole planning process. It has to go through all the same level of review that any project would. But you get a little bump up. I'd be willing to do that. Good questions? Yes.
I can actually answer his question. I'm actually a landlord here in town, probably one of the larger ones that participated in the Section 8 program. I have 22 of my tenants are Section 8. 6 are VASH, about the veteran. I have a lot of experience. I've been doing this 30 years.
VASH is the Veterans Administration Supportive Housing Program.
And frankly, I love the program. Some of my best tenants are the Section 8 tenants.
Does John Dietz have you on film?
I'm sorry, what?
Does John Dietz have you on
I've
film?
never even heard of it.
Can I have your card?
Sure. But let me tell you something. When Ken Cole was the director, I had emailed him several times saying, Ken, I will prepare a PowerPoint presentation and I will give regular, quarterly if you wish, meetings or presentations to potential landlords as to my experiences with the program. Never heard from the guy. I also sent them, again, your tenants have, your voucher holders have lots of problems in this town finding Section 8 housing. I will, in fact, I prepared the PowerPoint presentation for your tenant meetings of how to look strategies to find a Section 8 rental. Things like cover tattoos, don't wear your baseball caps backwards, don't go high, all of which have happened to me with tenants, by the way, and they look at the apartment. Never heard from Ken. The guy's a wizard. He's like the wizard behind the curtain. I never met him. I never spoke with him. I just got my my 1099, $290,000 this year, last year.
Wow.
So I'm a player.
Yeah.
Now hopefully with Mark, I don't know, Mark's in the room. Mark Fagan.
No, he's not.
Okay. He's more reasonable and so forth. They've got a search going on. I am still offering to do these, and I have a lot to say about Section 8 tenants.
I would
And
really
some
like
of mine
you.
are, I have one, he's put, first of all, my top 3 reasons for Section 8, and number 1 is not guaranteed rent. Number 1, turnover. They will leave, but in a pine box. They are there forever. Number 2, behavior. This is a huge hammer, or huge incentive. They have to behave, they can't do drugs, they can't have problems, they'll lose their voucher. So some of my best, they're most of them are well-behaved tenants. And number 3 is, guaranteed rent. But that is number 3. And one of my tenants, he has, knowing that he's there forever, he's put marble tile in his bathroom, mirrored closet doors on his, and he knows I have an open checkbook. If he wants anything, he knows I'll buy material, and he can put it in or have his friends. These guys, they have really done well. They're my best ones. And when all these landlords won't take Section 8, it's like, no problem, because they all come to me, and I get to pick up the litter.
You've really made my day, I have to tell you. I would love to have your contact information.
I am frustrated at our housing authority.
Okay.
They have not taken me up on my offer for
Okay.
both helping tenants, helping landlords. I even put an ad on Craigslist, screw them, I'll put an ad on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And I had a seminar, I was going to the tenants, I was going to give it at church,
Okay.
and somebody flagged it. I think the other tenants, because they don't want other tenants to know how to fund this, so they got flagged.
Well,
I can't, I
please
can't lose it.
do leave your contact information. I mean, this is exactly, what you are talking about is exactly the message that we need to get out there. And Jenny Panetta from the Housing Authority and I have been sharing this Alden Landlord Partnership, and we could really use your help. And we've got a really smart marketing committee who knows about that stuff, because I don't, but I mean, it seems to me that you're kind of a walking commercial.
But let me take my frustrations with the program.
Okay.
It's not, it doesn't, we have a problem in this town, we're a service industry. Everybody in this town's poor,
Right,
okay, except folks that have, university jobs to work over the hill.
right, those guys and everybody else, right?
Low income is, 80% of these people, we're all known.
That's our
80%
workforce.
Yeah.
It's not, we call it low-income housing, it's workforce
But
housing.
there's no preference given to working Section 8. I have a woman I'm trying to find an apartment for. She's got 2 jobs, one at grocery outlet, and I love grocery outlet, and I want to subsidize grocery outlet. I can't change minimum wage,
Right.
but I can provide a subsidy, an indirect subsidy by a Section 8 home. And I like grocery outlet, I want to support it, I want her to live there. She commutes from Greenville. And she's got a second job, and she's got a young child. Meanwhile, I've got people on Section 8, on disability, or other SSID, and they just sit around all day, 2 blocks from the wharf, in one of my buildings, smoking pot, playing their guitar. You know what? You can do all that, and you can be in Section 8, but it's called Los Banos or Turlock. They're mobile. They should be giving up their apartments for the working poor. And in Santa Clara County, they have a very program, it's called Moving to Work. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
We need that in Santa Cruz.
No, but we're not able to do that because of the structure of our local public housing agency, but it's a great program. And
But for the
thank you
housing
so much
vouchers,
for
you
your
can't do
comments. Yeah,
And if you
but I'd love to
don't
talk to you more about it.
In my section, when I put an apartment up, I put Section 8 welcome, working full-time or going to school full-time, in parentheses, somehow can contribute to the economic engine of Santa Cruz County.
There you go.
But if you want to sit around and be in the drum circle or play strum your guitar,
Rent from someone else.
go down Highway 99, there's plenty of housing down there.
Got it. All right, yes.
You mentioned earlier briefly just best practices for affordable housing. I'd like you to elaborate on what the best practices are. And you also mentioned something about financing to support the affordable housing. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think I might have mentioned it in 2 different directions. One of them is about having social service support within projects. So that is a well-studied best practice. And I think that might have been.
Yes, that was one. Yeah.
So basically what that is that we know that, people who are working multiple jobs, in a property like this, for instance, in order to live there, everyone has to have a minimum income or you don't get in, and then there's a maximum income too. And it's not a lot. As the folks living over here represent our workforce in the whole range, anything from childcare workers to, retail workers to, on and on. But part of having the community's work, and I should be probably having Diana explain this to you further, but is making sure that there's not just high quality property management on the site, which is one thing, but there's also some service coordination to provide things like classes for families and kids after school programs. We've got literacy programs going on, financial literacy, a whole range of how to prepare your taxes, all kinds of different things. And by having that kind of thing, having someone whose job it is to just kind of keep track of how's it going here. You can really avoid a lot of the kinds of problems that communities worry about when they hear an affordable housing project is coming in. There's recollection of, Cabrini Green in Chicago many years ago. And that is not at all the kind of projects that are being built. And we know that because, over the years, this field of community development has really evolved and gotten very smart. And that's one of the things. The financing piece of it is that it's expensive. It's like anything else. If you want to have a property well maintained and you want to provide kind of services, it's hard to do. It's hard for the market to do that on a project like that. We know that our development standards don't really allow for the construction of affordable, or rather rental housing, market rate rental housing. It doesn't get built for a reason. And in order to have all of the pieces in there, it does take, it's expensive. Well-designed, well-managed, service-enriched housing is what works well in our communities.
We have a project in Capitola on Bay Avenue, the Bay Avenue Senior Apartments. It used to be the Silvercrest Apartments owned by the Salvation Army, and they decided to get out of the housing business, and they sold, and the city helped put in a lot of city money and grants, and it's a very complicated process.
Yeah.
But they have an office there part-time that they have to staff with senior network services. So that someone is there, so that if there's someone in need in the complex that needs Meals on Wheels, that needs some referral for some other medical or social service kind of a need, they can go there. They don't have to just go to the management that just doesn't have that kind of information.
Right.
And it's been wonderful. It's really been a big help there.
Really successful project, and congratulations on that one. Like all of them, that one took years.
Question? I have some issues about high density, and the thing that I have the question about is basically when you talk about one bedroom and studios, what we're seeing on the east side is market rate housing. It's 30 to 50% higher than the surrounding neighborhoods. And what that does is drive up the cost of the affordable housing all around the area. At the same time, the neighborhoods are giving up a tremendous amount in terms of the impacts of the density. So I really struggle with this issue because I am concerned. I know a lot of people that have family members that cannot find housing, and they live within sometimes 3 or 4 generations in the houses around my neighborhood. So those bedrooms are being full. But when it comes to affordable housing, my question to you is, what percentage of those one bedrooms and studios will be actually affordable? Because I'm seeing there have to be 150,000 or more to afford those units, and they're less than 700 square feet.
So I'm not sure of a particular project that you're talking about. So that's a project in the city. Right.
But I'm right on the borders. The mid pen is right up the street, and that's a great project.
So there's a lot of factors when you talk about how much is a market rate project going to cost. So first of all, there's going to be a question, is it a rental project, or is it an affordable project, or rather an ownership project? That's going to be a factor in how much it costs. There is a concept that is affordable by design. And we know we have a very constrained market. We know we have a housing shortage. So if there are no legal constraints on how much a developer can either sell or rent a unit for. It's going to be market driven. We know if we have more, I mean, one of the ways that we can address that is, that will help. On the other hand, we're a very long way from building our way out of a housing problem. But most projects, and particularly an ownership project, will have some affordability baked into it. So there will be some units that are deed restricted as affordable. I mean, that's one way that happens. I made reference earlier to a Palmer fix, to a way, and I know that the city is really concerned about this because they actually get market rate rental projects built. And so having a way to make sure that there's affordability baked into a project is an important piece. Yeah.
I actually have 3 questions. To segue with what she said, what do you think about rent control? If the market drives the price that can be asked, how about rent control? My second question is, what is the median county income? Because a lot of these definitions of what is affordable and all that is based on the county median income. What is the county median income? And my third and last question is, I'm aware that the county at one time recently had a requirement that 40% of new developments be affordable. And that was nixed because it was not supported. Can you please explain that? And I just want to add in that I think the economic feasibility to maintain a 40% level of affordable building could be supported by the very high appraised value of property in this county.
All right, let me see if I can get all of those. So what was the first one again?
The first one was rent control.
Oh, rent control. There have been a couple of attempts at rent control ballot measures, as I'm sure you know. I think it hasn't been since the 80s. If you wanted to have more information on what that would take, I suggest you talk to Bruce Van Allen, who was very involved in that. If there is an effort for rent control, it won't come from the county because it's not an appropriate county activity. Should one come forward, I'm sure I'll be talking about it. It's a heavy lift. I guess I could say that. So what's the median income for, we're about to get an update of median income for a family of 4 is about $86,000.
How much?
About $86,000.
86. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Does that sound high?
Yes.
Median, half above, half below. That's
The city's is under 60,000.
It's
So that's
60.
all in five for the county.
Yeah, it's 65 for the city.
what was the third question?
The third question
Oh,
was...
the 40%.
Yes.
So I should clarify a little bit about that. That isn't quite right. There was an ordinance passed in around, I want to say 2005 or 6, that basically said we were losing our land designated for residential uses at an alarming rate. Or rather for commercial uses, because it was going to residential because prices were so high for housing. And there was an ordinance passed that basically recognized the importance of a variety of land use types. And so if a property owner wanted to convert their commercial land to a residential use, that in order to do that, they would have to have 40% of the units created would have to be affordable, as we define it at the county. What that did, there were very little land converted under that. There's 2 pieces of projects that were converted and that were included under that. And so it did work as a very active discouragement of converting land from non-residential to residential uses. And then there was a nexus study that was conducted. I referred to the Affordable Housing Update a couple of years ago. And what a nexus study does is it really takes a look at, for local government to look at its fees and establish what's called nexus and proportionality. So in other words, if government is going to ask the private sector to pay a fee, there has to be a reason. There has to actually be a public good, and you can't ask for more than is fair. And as a result of that study, we were really looking at our overall Measure J program, but one of the things that was established is that 40% affordability was simply not proportional to what we were asking for, and in other words, it became illegal. So it's no longer in play.
Can I add a little bit on rent control?
Mm-hmm.
All studies have shown rent control is death to the rental market. The problem is it only benefits one group of people, the current group currently living there. Everybody knows who Cindy Lauper is, right? Girls Just Want to Have Fun. She was in a rent-controlled apartment in New York City for $980. It's a $4,000 apartment. Is that right? Is that fair? That gives her more time to hang out, by the way, with Mayor Farrell, who also lives in a rent-controlled apartment in New York City for like $1,200. And it's a $5,000 apartment.
So thank you for your input, and I think that would be, the two of you could talk about whether it seems like a reasonable process to undertake. I appreciate that. All right.
Is this the right here? You can take maybe one more question.
Okay.
She's been very generous with her time. She's been talking for almost an hour and a half. So I think if she wants to take one more question, and then I think we'll have some more of our program that we need to finish up with. Thank you very
Sorry about
much.
that. Would you like to?
Yeah, I just had a question about your guys' affiliation with the university and what any strategies could be to utilize some of that money, or if it's kind of their problem, the students and the amount of people that they keep accepting, and they kind of are having these fluctuations with this past year they had to put a bunch of freshmen into hotels because they are required to admit freshmen into on-campus housing. But what about the second, third, fourth, fifth year students who are having to drop out because they can't afford housing, and they can't afford housing close enough to be able to get to classes? Is that something that's kind of in this plan, or is that, something that they should be kind of worried about more so? I feel like it's kind of...
It is a huge issue, and of course the impact of the university and to a lesser extent Cabrillo have a big impact on our community. Students are part of our community. We know that the fact that we don't have enough affordable units, smaller units, means that we've got, neighborhoods where, 2 and even 3 students are sharing a bedroom in a 3 or 4 bedroom home. We have the proliferation of cars, on and on. Not to mention what that does to our housing prices. I could probably talk for an hour on the impact. And then the impact on students. I've talked to a really remarkable number of students who are homeless. They're University of California students, and they're homeless and managing to work towards their degree.
And the professors are homeless too.
That one I haven't heard, but I'm not going to doubt you. So first of all, what's the county role in that? Of course, recognizing the issue, trying to have land use rules that allow for the creation of housing that meets the need, and having more small units will help in some way. We just need more housing for the people who are here now. On a policy level, mostly the housing strategies with the university are handled by the city of Santa Cruz. The county isn't closely related. So that's the short answer.
I'm just kind of wondering though, because all these things sound like they're going to be wrapped up in this kind of bureaucratic web of in years and years, and we're going to revisit this in 2017, we're going to look at this, and meanwhile there's nothing to facilitate these people now and to be able to kind of continue with their livelihood, that they're just being criminalized for trying to rest.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, public policy happens over a long horizon. And I think we want it to happen over a long horizon, but it is really important that we do have a clear sense of policy direction. We don't want things to change quickly. As you mentioned, things change. If things change too quickly, puts a tremendous amount of pressure on our community also. We want to be taking the time to think through, talk through what the impacts are. We also know that community need and policy direction is going to change over time. So I mentioned Measure J a couple of times, for instance. So Measure J was a voter initiative that passed in 1970. I'll stop, I really believe. Passed in 1978. It created an urban services line. And it did a really good job of protecting our open space, protecting our agricultural land, and it was, I mean, we were an absolute innovator in this area by passing that. But the plan for drawing an urban services line is that within the urban area, jurisdictions need to identify places where they can build housing to meet the community need for housing. And for a long time, we've been slow to meet that mandate of Measure J, and we're working on it very hard. That's what I can say.
One time.
Okay.
Speaking of Measure J, I think part of the original Measure J was the inclusionary requirement, that is to include a certain percentage for lower moderate income units. I understand that the county recently rescinded that and is no longer requiring inclusionary, but rather in lieu payments. In your view, how is that working out? And is it comparable to actually providing low-income units?
So it's not quite all the way there, and I'll just take this one last thing. I am glad to hang around for other questions if you'd like.
Thank you.
And before the update, the Chapter 17 Tennessee County Code required that for developments of 5 units or more, 15% of those had to be affordable, and they're those deed-restricted units that we've been talking about earlier. In 2015, with the update, the board did approve a 2-year period where they said, let's take a look at if we, instead of requiring on-site units, that we require developers to pay a per square foot fee that would generate local dollars to build more housing. Part of the thinking of the board at that time was that if it makes it easier to build housing, maybe that's a benefit by itself. And then we've generated some of those local dollars that I talked about earlier. I know that we're collecting data and watching it, and we plan on returning to the board. We've been directed to return to the board in 2017 to take a look and see the effectiveness. Did it have the intended effect? And I don't know where the board's going to go with it at that time. But so that's the current policy.
Can I offer a
So
suggestion?
with that, I think what I really need to do is thank you all for coming. Thank you for your interest. And I'll hang around for